Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Isaac Pickell and Marie Buck this evening. Just a quick webinar overview. As you're joining us, the chat is closed, but you might want to keep the chat window open during the event, as I'll be sharing links to purchase collections from our authors this evening throughout the event. And live transcription is available if you need it on your toolbar. It's right below you. As a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan, our doors are open to the public. And if you are watching us later on YouTube, there are always links to purchase books right in the description below me. In lieu of a book purchase, we'd also ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming while it continues. So whether you'd like to think of that as this week's or this month's or this year's subscription to our virtual programming, you can make donations at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us from. And now I will introduce tonight's authors in the order that they will be reading for us. Marie Buck's books include Unsolved Mysteries, Good Night, Marie, May God Have Mercy on Your Soul, and Portrait of Doom. They are the managing and web literary editor at Social Text and live in Brooklyn. And Isaac Pickell is a poet and PhD student at Wayne State University in Detroit, where he teaches and studies the borderlands of Blackness and Black literature. A graduate of Miami University's MFA program, his work has been featured in Crazy Horse Fence, The Journal, The Missouri Review, and Ninth Letter. You can find his new stuff online at Black Warrior Review, Protein Magazine, and Sixth Finch. Everything Saved Will Be Last is his debut chapbook. Isaac has taken a seat in all 50 states and has so much to look forward to. We have so much to look forward to for tonight's reading, so please help me and a silent round of applause and welcome Isaac Pickell and Marie Buck into your living rooms.
Okay. Thank you, John, for having me, and thanks, Isaac, for inviting me to read with you. Yeah, so the book that John mentioned is Unsolved Mysteries, which is out from Roof. And then tonight I actually wanted to read a couple of new pieces, which are from a collaborative project I'm working on with Matthew Walker, and it's about movies and friendship. And each poem is titled with a movie. So this first one is called Pixote. I start to watch Pixote to keep up with our list, but it feels like too much for the night and I change tracks. And actually, trigger warning for suicidality and addiction for this set. Okay. I start to watch Pixote to keep up with our list, but it feels like too much for the night and I change tracks. I watched Charlie Chaplin's The Cure, which isn't on the list, but is right there on Criterion. In only half an hour, why not? The Cure is from 1917, an unfathomably long time ago, possibly before anyone I've ever known existed on this earth. The setting is a sort of spa/treatment center for people with alcoholism and with other ailments, possibly, to go and then be cured. The guests sit by a spring, and drinking from the spring is what cures you. The spring water is anti-alcoholism water. This is right before Prohibition, I guess in the thick of the discourse that led to it. The basic premise is that Charlie Chaplin's character does not, in fact, want to stop drinking, and so has brought a bunch of booze to the spa in a suitcase, and also keeps finding ways around drinking the anti-alcohol spring water. There are a few really good jokes. For instance, one plot line wherein, to get rid of Chaplin's alcohol, a staff member throws the bottles of booze out the window and inadvertently into the curative spring, so that everyone drinking from the spring gets drunk, has a dance party, etc., unintentionally. It's a fucked up joke, but it's also kind of good. Most of the other humor involves debilitating alcoholism and/or a man trying to sexually assault one of the women, played entirely for laughs, which is, in its own way, rougher than the children sexually assaulting other children bit of Pixote that I saw. You're definitely not supposed to laugh at Pixote, at least. I look up Chaplin and his history. I'm thinking, I guess, of a phone call I had when I was maybe 15. The friend I had a crush on was in some sort of state of teenage despair. I think he presented the narrative as Charlie Chaplin was maligned as molesting children, when in fact they really hated him because he was a communist. I looked this up, and it seems like Chaplin was indeed a fellow traveler, and he had a series of younger wives, with the youngest having married him when she was 16 and he was in his 30s. A marriage that wasn't just a cultural difference between that era and ours. They kept the ceremony small because he could have faced statutory rape charges. This friend, when I was 15 or so, was crying to me on the phone, and I felt thrilled by the intimacy of it, certain that the eroticism and despair equated to a depth of feeling and depth of connection between him and me. He was, for reasons I can't recall and likely didn't understand in the first place, crying about Charlie Chaplin's life story. This conversation seemed noteworthy to me for a long time. I felt like I had learned something about life, though I could not now tell you what. Much later, this friend, I became very close to for a couple of years and then actively cut off, died of an overdose. A second friend, reflecting on this death, said he'd seen a lot of guys try much harder to get sober and that this person didn't even try. I can't actually discern, really, how this movie is situating itself in relation to temperance. Chaplin's incredibly beautiful, which I hadn't realized before. In one scene, he's trying to escape from a burly masseuse who's enthusiastically beating his clients. In others, he's wooing his love interest. I was complaining the other day that now maybe the word trauma is overused. It seems to be a catch-all for everything, for all manner of describing evil, injury, dislike, pain resulting from things like assaults, etc. It's too broad and places the nature of an event or action squarely within the victim, and rather, framing in terms of victimization is the only way to make evil tangible, which creeps me out a bit. But also, God, what were people doing 100 years ago? Maybe trauma discourse is the antidote to a hazing discourse, wherein everyone does evil to everyone else and laughs about it all the time. I realize I've previously seen only one Charlie Chaplin film, The Gold Rush. I can picture who I watched it with and what house I watched it in. It was around 2009 or so. 1925 and about the early 1850s, a 75-year gap. Then I realized my first exposure to Chaplin was actually through a terrible 1993 romantic comedy called Benny and June, wherein Johnny Depp plays a film-obsessed eccentric who imitates Chaplin, Keaton, and other stars of that era. Mary Stuart Masterson plays his mentally ill love interest, and Aidan Quinn plays Masterson's caretaker brother, who falls for Julianne Moore. Depp and Masterson are supposed to be unable to take care of themselves, but their quirks on the screen, at least as I remember them, are almost entirely charming. Depp doing little mime routines, Masterson being weirdly reticent as well as beautiful, Depp making grilled cheeses with a clothes iron, Masterson being just like really into painting, Depp doing domestic labor but playfully, Pippi Longstocking style. Masterson paints with her palms instead of with a brush, for instance. Masterson wears a snorkeling mask around the house without reason. But just now, in this moment, I've started this movie. It was right there on Amazon Prime. And so it actually turns out that Masterson's character assaults people, disrupts her caretaker's work life over minor desires for peanut butter, tapioca, and other foods, tries to set house fires, stops traffic and intimidates people in their cars, has auditory hallucinations. But this, I guess, only makes this movie even dumber. She's dangerous to others, yet it's not herself depicted as suffering. Her caretaker brother loves her without complication despite her cruelty to him. Her romance with Johnny Depp, who seems to have been abused by his previous caretaker, solves it all immediately for both of them. The general vibe is quirky, which is why I think why my high school best friend and I loved it so much. And we thought it was cool, deep even, that it referenced all these very old films that we were unfamiliar with. The extra diegetic music is somehow the most offensive part of it. Quirkiness is the aesthetic of the end of history, I guess. It's 1993. Love solves it all. Johnny Depp has a hole in his sock. Mary Stuart Masterson paints him sleeping, his foot in the air, and the camera zooms in to highlight the hole as a signifier of his mental illness. In one timeline, Chaplin evades questioning by the House Un-American Activities Committee. And at a different point on that same timeline, the possibility of an outside is recalibrated as bright set design, beautiful faces with only minimal makeup, a surface level reference to film history. I wish I could describe how the extradiegetic music works, what it is about the sounds that make it precisely suggest uplifting quirk, the worst of all affects. The other music in the film is the Proclaimer song, I'm Gonna Be 500 Miles, a song I listened to over and over again in middle and high school, as my own love failed to fix anything. I like that in The Cure, the curative water isn't really all that curative. It's not a magic bullet or a miracle, since the problem is that Charlie Chaplin's character just doesn't want it. In The Cure, the characters trying to sober up keep falling right into the springs of curative water because they're already drunk. And there's something that is legitimately very funny about the fact that they're trying to get the water into their bodies, but instead, because they're already fucked up, their bodies get into the water instead. It points out that you can be in water, and that's different from water being in you. That skin isn't so porous as to allow for interchange. The body has integrity. So you can't accidentally fall in and fix it all. Neither immersion nor love is an antidote against others' despair. Okay, so that was Quixote. And then I'm going to read a poem about Tempopo. It's a Japanese comedy from the 80s. Tempopo is about eating and movies, both good topics. Ian told me to watch it when I asked him about movies in the park, on a day when it was still very cold out. Maybe this was March. If you look up Tampopo on the internet, it's now the name of a bunch of newish US ramen places, which feels too bad because, of course, I felt like a sucker looking at the Google search results. The movie's main plot is two truckers stop at a ramen shop. The ramen is mediocre and the shop unsuccessful. The truckers decide to help the widow whose shop it is make the shop a success. And in doing this, they assemble a sort of Scooby gang of characters, all working together on different things: the broth, the noodles, the concept, the interior of the space. This plot also gives the opportunity for a lot of iterations of one of my favorite movie tropes, the 80s montage where someone improves at something quickly, the sort of scene that is in Rocky and Flashdance and Dirty Dancing. The truckers reminded me of Kings of the Road a little. Trucking as a segue to surveying the region, trucking as a segue to assessing life. I didn't quite realize that the characters, Guru and Gun, are supposed to be driving, specifically, a milk truck. I found this out about the milk truck by Wikipediaing the movie directly after watching it, a bad habit. I also got on Seamless and ordered ramen for lunch too. Kind of goofy, but now I'm eating it and happy. I'm saving the egg for last because I like it best, and also realizing that I'd be one of the characters who asks Tampopo to go heavy on the menma, and I always add corn. I used to eat ramen much more regularly when I first started working at NYU, first at an overpriced place right by Bobst, then later when I was on campus a lot and working more at this place in the East Village that was fast and relatively cheap. But still a sort of dumb lunch expense, a $12 bowl of ramen the 3 days a week I was on campus. The same thing every time, good but not noteworthy at all. And the restaurant slightly too loud and cramped and distant from my office. I feel like I've been bad at eating for as long as I can remember, wasting money on pretty mediocre lunch food out, both when that felt less consequential financially and when that felt more consequential financially. It dovetails with another thing I'm bad at, getting out the door. I'm fine to get into work on time, and I'm fine when things are the same every day, but bad when it's a soft start time, bad when anything is different, bad when there are other people around as I'm getting ready to leave. I get flustered by options, possibilities, things to do, and packing a lunch is one of the things that throws me off. A former lover used to have a handwritten sign on the back of his door as you'd leave, "Don't forget your lunch." I've packed a lunch maybe 15 times as an adult. When I worked at City Tech and had to eat between classes by the J Street Metro Tech stop, where there are only the dumbest chains, I didn't have very far to go. I'd wind up eating really dumb chain food or a slice, or sometimes some sort of fruit salad from the CVS, even though I was underemployed and was cooking really good things regularly at home. So I can't get out the door, and I also can't make decisions about where to eat or anything else when I'm hungry. I realized this concretely for the first time on a group trip to Toronto, circa 2006 or so. We were all very hungry, and I kept rejecting every possible restaurant until it became almost comical, but also definitely annoying. So that we were all roaming the city looking at menus for an hour And eventually Steve told me I'd probably feel better after I ate and just picked somewhere. I think my ex didn't take the lead in that moment because I would have been hypersensitive to the criticism from him and probably defensive or even aggressive in the sort of way that seems silly to me now, that I feel like I see all the time. The sort of 60s redux where women are constantly on guard against any perceived oppressive rhetoric from their boyfriends when the particular iteration of patriarchy that's being referenced is no longer relevant. Such that there were, I think, many problems, some of them related to gender and some not, in that relationship. But all of my dumb 20-something ways of thinking about it could never get at the actual thing, and sometimes made me cruel or let us engage in this mutual cruelty. Where he'd eat canned foods and I'd cook, but most of the time we'd just eat separately. Or where we'd plan our lives together, then abruptly change courses, then not, without ever talking it out. Or I'd fall utterly into intellectual exchange and jokes with just this one person, but never allow the emotional weight of that in. Or stay in the situation for many years when the corresponding emotion wasn't volleyed my way either. First diving into reading and writing together, but then if I think of this relationship later in Detroit, my main memory that suggests a pattern is insisting on having it out about, for instance, Derrida or Lukács or something else dumb at this bar we'd go to by ourselves after seminar, because we were both lonely and then later crying. I.e., I had a perverse sort of hypervaluation of independence that, thank God, fell away as I aged. And that seems to bubble up differently in different people, but to continually return to some sort of 60s upper middle class playbook learned from school and from magazines, so that all of one's offenses are then jotted into a 60-year-old feminist ledger. And my early 20s self couldn't just want things and give them and also want to give them. But anyway, eating. I get hungry and then frazzled, which then makes me unable to make decisions, even very small ones, about what to eat. And so it's nice to have the same thing every day, or to have dumb little foods sitting around and grab them as I want to grab them. But I'm also not sure why. Most people seem to have a longer fuse between knowing they need to eat and feeling incapacitated by hunger than I do. I'm bad at food. The characters in Tampopo are neither good at food nor bad at food, which I think is very nice in a movie about food. It takes a satisfyingly long time for Tampopo herself. The name of the character is the name of the film, is the eventual name of the ramen shop. It takes a long time for her to become good at making ramen. It's not just a single montage of her cooking, but several montages spread across the whole movie and interspersed with these little vignettes about people and other food. The best scene is a raw egg going back and forth between two mouths until the yolk breaks and overflows the woman's mouth, spilling out onto her and her lover's clothing, an egg orgasm. Or the salt and lemon on a nipple, the live crawfish on a belly, trapped under a bowl and tickling her with their legs. In WR, Mysteries of the Organism, the egg yolk is passed from hand to hand, but here it's passed between mouths and is exchanged several times before it breaks. Early in the pandemic, I went on a run with a friend, and they told me about the sex scene with Rachel Weisz and Rachel McAdams, in which Rachel Weisz spits into Rachel McAdams' mouth. They do it all the time with their partner now, after watching that movie, they said. And somehow I don't remember if this conversation had to do with spit in the pandemic or with sex more generally. I've never spit into anyone's mouth, but remember being so surprised the first time I saw someone spit forcefully onto someone else's genitals, rather than spitting into a hand and rubbing it on. And now I do it all the time too. Ever since I impulse joined the Aspects group on Facebook and every other social media algorithm sometimes shows me the mixing of things together. Right now on Twitter, it's glitter with some sort of ketchup-like substance. On Facebook, it's dessert tricks, caramel hardening on DIY molds, chocolate being poured into ice cube trays in the freezer to make a fancy shape. Intermingled with ads for queer boxers and various clothing that seems to think I find a politics and simple reversals of representation, so that now the model is fat. Now the model wearing clothes for a 20-something is like 60 and weathered, with all gray hair. Now the model for the shampoo has a large pimple on her face. If you're massaging someone, you pour the oil out onto a hand. Or in these other scenarios, you pour oil onto a hand and then smear it on a face. Or you pump the conditioner from an economy-sized bottle into your hand and put it on your head and massage it into your hair. Or you squeeze the cat's food from a packet. It is satisfying, like if you were popping bubble wrap. And then on top of that, the food makes them happy. Though how grotesque that making them happy is giving them their survival thing, right? Of course they're happy. They depend on me squeezing the food packet in order to stay alive. The economy-sized bottle of shampoo makes you presentable and mostly feels like a necessity, but comes from Sephora and is, I guess, probably a mid-grade shampoo. Definitely fancier than I used to buy, but you can get much fancier. The oils I put on my face seem fancy to me, a new pandemic luxury purchased from a perfumer in Hudson. The massage oil is not a toiletry, and definitely superfluous, but also extremely cheap, and also smells delightful, or did when I first got it years ago. The egg, ostensibly, could nourish you, but part of the pleasure is watching it get all over the actors' fashiony white outfits. I wonder how many of the outfits they went through shooting the scene and ruining them over and over. If I had to characterize it, I'd say that raw egg is somehow a luxury because it is both beautiful and disgusting at the same time. The idea with the egg in WR is that the passing of the egg is part of a therapy and solves some kind of deep need. As you point out, Tampopo ends with a shot of someone, not even a character, just a person presented as the credits roll, breastfeeding a baby. It's a close-up, and we really see the baby sucking. We see the nipple. It's so graphic, it made me feel awkward about the fact that nipples being sucked for me is an idea entirely about sex. Clearly untrue in the larger scheme of life. I feel like if someone introduced the concept of food anew, we'd all call it problematic. It's simultaneously a necessity and total indulgence, and feels like an indulgence every time if you're hungry enough. You can always argue that you need it, as though bread itself is already bread and roses too. Yeah, thank you.
Marie, thank you so much. Those were indeed shorts about movies, one might say, but perhaps a lot more than that. That was great. I really enjoyed it. I am just going to read some poems. I don't know if they have a theme necessarily. A few of them are from my debut chap. Some of them are quite new instead. And just wanted to say thank you for John and Literati having us here, and Marie for accepting my invitation and coming along. I'm excited for seeing more of these as they develop. All right. Let me put on my outside voice and read. It doesn't matter who started it. I saw my house burn and the wind come up, saw smells of all the overhanging branches and fury and siren and diesel fuel. And as heat rises, all I could handle was the one ringing question, is that all there is to a fire? A streak of nothing but blurred red and the prophecy of smolder, of unsalted earth, fertile for the fallen structure, for the loss of sharp corners and careful edging, for the ignorance of kitchen islands, security systems, bay homes, bay windows, smart homes, just memory of brick and birch. Because some days you can't be the delicate gardener, maintainer of bulb and root. Some days you only find the clawed foot. The waters turned smoke, the child choked. When your house burns in a rising wind, you start planting trees for eyes that won't know our mess, eyes who haven't opened yet. Uncommissioned elegy for the children of children. The world is dying, but so are we, hothouse flowers. How weird that everything there is somebody's job. Let us pollinate your lore. That's the thing about the world. It's terrible, but so good. With all of this and nowhere left to set one's feet. We could look so pretty outside. Liberty, still, that very bitter joke. And the colors only fade when you are convinced of such a thing as original shade. How weird that everything there was somebody's job. There's no shame dying for nothing. It's not over once you figure it out. I've always been drawn to the aging process of our immobile objects and the stories behind them, like a still locomotive corroding where we left it, like fences that grow into trees. I like to think our things are travelers that first precede and then follow us, getting lost and found and in between finding, deep, dark places no one cares or dares to look, a truth uncovered by its permanence. And I wonder, if we become things, what do we find? The latest is that everything will be settled in the rust belt, as if rust could be a place and not a description, as if immobile objects age or die or have stories we did not write ourselves, as if some of us were not already named things, forever anchored by the arrogance of trying like hell to measure effects with more endurance than we will ever have. We are just a species begging for answers. Is this your dream or mine? How much of me is not visible? How does even reality distort reality, to say nothing of our mirrors? Something or another about a great decline, about a post-truth era, but this is just a poem where you are allowed to write literally whatever you want to, like how this is not settling anything at all, like how if things go bad, it's only because they were already gone, like how our dreams can do better than doubt, which is not growth, like how self-awareness is no finish line. Okay, this one needs a little bit of context, so I'm going to read a short intro, which I usually don't, but here it is. In 1993, Joseph Paul Jernigan, a death row inmate, was the first donor to the Visible Human Project, a high-priced science experiment that carefully ground his body down at 1,871 regular intervals until none of him remained, except 1,872 photographs that someone hoped could shed light on bodies that had nothing to do with his. While the study proved mostly useless for medicine, Jernigan's 15 gigabyte remains linger in a museum as a valuable educational tool of errors. In 2015, a famous experimental poet stepped onto a high-priced university stage and read and read and read until nothing of his dead subject remained, titling this disappearing act after who had been. While perhaps useless to poetry, one could say he lingered in error. And this poem is called Uncommissioned Elegy for Joseph Paul Jernigan and the Body of Michael Brown. The first digital corpse traded pain for posterity, taking poison, rejecting its rightful chair, but the audience applause. The audience forever inside your drive, and he is saved. He dies for endless dissection, consonant with the expectation we are allowed to linger on the skin of a criminal. Repeating hierarchies of the global organ, the first visible man relives his American dream on knees that now bend every way. Plastic collapse, all ribs and earlobes and every piece of your body, which keeps growing even after falling into bare bones horizon. Receding into digital morgues, renaming the mortuary a science, a clinical gaze that determines who is human by coordinates for who was, plotted with rulers, clamps, and forceps, and splayed onto touch screens. The body is now swiped through. Now you can refresh us, refresh, update until we are cross-section, millimeter by millimeter, softened enough as slivers of data until we are made to matter, reassorted into the new archive. But Those photographs were never really surgeons. Once freeze-framed and still life, close up, invisibly projected as larvae, fat and full on promised knowledge, like category was our new chrysalis. Like the butterflies bloom, not knowing they used to be goo, and still holding on to memory, like wormy smells of fear and hope and safety. And now we are freed, unpeeling crispy layers off binary wings, promises to disseminate as truth over myth, even in death. And so what if we lose our fleshy interior, separate from muscle, untether from every embedded response, metamorphing all our skin cells in a flash until excluded life is exposed as a toolbox? The corpse of the future sees everyone resting in digital desk drawers, writing free obituaries each day as another charts over our autopsy in the background, awaiting the prize of our so-called moment of death. How quickly do you erase the body under the sheets where it finally rested? Yours is not the first corpse to become glamour, to dazzle with that soft pink matter. Look, no one said the butterflies could. No butterfly ever asked to be a metaphor for flowering thought. Look here. No one really tells the butterflies shit. This is not a metaphor for anything. Beside a small lake ringed by mountains, covered in many proper places to flutter and settle and set, a little moth flies past in that unsettled manner of theirs, a little too close to the water for my comfort. It is early morning, and everything is noise, croak, hum, buzz, breeze, and song. The brightness of dawn is startling with internal contrast. Here exposed at the lakeside, the day has started just feet from the shade of underbrush, still cast in uniform gloom. Shadow is always starker at beginnings. The moth wobbles above the almost waves, then suddenly loses steam, dropping like a cartoon airplane onto the surface of a lake. I can't see its details a ways down the shore, but the blur of frantic movement is clear at the center of concentric little wakes echoing out from its panic. This is no good place for a moth, only noticed for the absence of anything else that could be named of note. And my first responses are rote, idle considerations, whys and hows, then careless personifications like trouble and sad. It's this that moves me. I stand, I grab a stick, I walk over to see helpless beating wings turned upside down, not strong enough, and the little brown thing floating on its back, its antenna sunk. A helpless body. It's a moth, just a moth, in a lake, and what's really to be done? I offer the stick, though, once, twice, poke it with salvation, really. I offer a hand or a question. Are you just upside down in a calm lake at sunrise time, beating your wings against the water, and maybe, just maybe, are you drowning with antenna all wet, telling you over and over and over and over to move, 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 because for reasons that cannot be understood, this is just what some moths do? But legs do eventually grasp. A couple more pokes, then legs drag the heavier bits onto this stick and hold steady. Me and the moth and the stick fly together, carefully, then land carefully on a bigger stick or maybe a fallen tree. And there are no more beating wings, which I read in passing as surrender, and then patience, and then a trial. The wings still work. The moth lives, and it chooses, if moths can do such things as choosing, to give the lake crossing another go. Wobbly again at first, then gaining enough balance to be assessed as merely unsettled in that mothy way of theirs. And then the moth reaches somewhere close to shore. I can't see. Maybe it landed on the soft fanned needles of a cedar. And so many bodies find themselves in predicaments. We think too often, what good might it do to worry ourselves over bodies while they are still named nothing but bodies? Parts designed to change shape once they're apart. Drink water for this one. 1. A foot is a foot when it hits the ground. A foot is a foot when it slips out of boots or bindings. A foot is a foot when it buckles under 8 hours' weight. A foot is a foot when it hangs paper dolls that are straining a hole where a string tethers you to your identical cutouts. Your hand is a foot when it hits the ground. 2. Your hand is a foot when it grows sore from the tasks of survival. A foot is a foot when it falls asleep even with no hand to soothe it. A foot is a foot when it yearns for the swell of your neck's gasping. A foot is a foot when it rests comfortably on a knee on the subway. 3. A foot is a foot when it kicks down doors. A foot is a foot when it kicks down your door. A foot is a foot when it believes we can all weep together. A foot is a foot when it senses huddled masses getting more massive. A foot is a foot when it walks over graves in search of relatable misery. A foot is a foot when it speaks names on the stones and wonders how long a person last spoke that name out loud, or if anyone will say it again. Your hand is a foot when it knows there's nothing it wants from the sky. A foot is a foot when it knows it was never a god but keeps acting like it. Your hand is a foot when it never imagined the windows could open. And we are all living fiction. It never occurred to me to open the window. The hell would I want from the sky? The sky is stuck in last year's snow or something else soft to sink into. Maybe we'd sound soft enough on another planet to find yourself a repository for all those things that can't be killed. I trust near misses more than wounds, how no one understands no is a full sentence, and someday you will turn 77, even if you die first, and even then not, a day will pass when you don't break something for the first time. For all the broken things unfixed with nothing left but time to fix them. We've discovered whole vocabularies of disappointment. Maybe I am as old as we all feel, detached as we all think. What if all this talk of new normal is nothing more than old rumor finally hitting the fan, and we all see the very same thing in ink blot splatters on our separate walls and can't chalk it up to happenstance again? What if all this distance is a really big mirror facing the wrong way? What if the universe was not such an unspeakable terror for its endlessness in my hands? Pale palms unburned and opened could tumble each and every one of you I could ever imagine loving or touching, breathing and petrified, laying there, waiting, into the inert vision at the end of my go-go gadget arms, finally long enough to fold each and every one within a single shared thought, rather than only recognizing the universe in deference to its scale, which we always mistranslate as endless difference. So will each and every, or even just one of you, please pity me with this simple kindness? Tell me it's okay that the universe is so big that it must be ignored. And then I have just one more because I'm out of water. Decay relay. Let us cause problems with purpose for this enemy's entropy. Like, if people only knew this all is a mess that no one intends to clean, or that problems without solutions are really just problems with solutions that only help the kind of people they pronounce they or them or you know who. Can you even imagine all those billions in property damage? If it were compulsory to name how long they've made the same indecision, with no better reason but to keep making more of them, and add to their flashing tallies of greed wrapped tight around their neckties, laced in a neon yarn someone named wage theft. Look, this whole thing is closing in on the brink. It's either collapse or break us into constituent molecules, but their ends are not disorder or chaos. The truth of it is, there was already a natural order, and it's beautiful, and we are a part of it. And the world we've been bent to build in their image could be shaped by another model. This one's only carved in stone because the wrong people keep finding chisels. We too can rise dusty up mountaintops, and we won't need make-believe to say that something behind us caught fire. Your life should not need to be politics, but it is. Your breath should not need to escape, but they've bought every dictionary and sealed every word that still feels like a present worth fighting for behind labels like vulgar or archaic. And if we don't break it, we'll be replaced by soft and lethal composite fibers only the cops and landlords know where to buy. But the past can be what you make of it, and the future does not need to echo anything to be heard. It's okay, or it is gonna be okay. Thank you.
Thank you. What a beautiful poem to end on. I have opened up the chat, so you can't give your round of applause in person to both of these poets, but if you want to give your onomatopoeic claps in the chat, or kudos or highs or hellos before we sign off. But to Isaac and Marie, thank you so much for joining us this evening on At Home with Literati, and we hope to have you both in the store for your next collections for another reading in person. But until then, I hope you continue to stay safe and be well. And to all of our attendees, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you at the next event. So take care all and have a great night.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you, John. Thank you all.
Jonathan.